Hi everyone, this is Alexander Lim and welcome to AuthorStory, where on every episode we speak to an interesting author with an interesting topic of interest. And speaking of interesting, we have an interesting episode today because it concerns something which affects all of us sooner or later, aging. Our guest is Thomas Moore, who could have become a priest, used to be a monk, was a practicing psychotherapist, and is now a writer, columnist, and lecturer in such fields as mythology and imagination. He's the author of this week's featured book, Ageless Soul, The Lifelong Journey Towards Meaning and Joy. And you can check out his book right now by clicking on the Amazon link in the video description below. So, Thomas, welcome to Author Story. Thanks for being our guest.
Thank you, Alex. I really am looking forward to talking to you.
Cool. You're welcome. You're welcome. So, to start off, Thomas, just to acknowledge, I just like to acknowledge that you've written a lot of books, around 20, I believe. What
Yes, I really don't know how many. It depends how you count, but I think it's somewhere between 20 and 30.
Well, that marks you a pretty prolific author. I mean, if you don't know exactly how many books you've written, that's something. What made you decide to get into the writing and lecturing gig, so to speak?
I never thought I'd be a writer. I thought my friends were the writers, but
Mm,
I've loved words and language all my life since I was in high school.
mm,
And I reached a point where I thought I would be a college professor. I really loved
mm.
doing that, but I didn't stay with that long. And I became a therapist, and then I felt I had a lot of things I wanted to say. I had done a great deal of study in psychology and world religions and
Mhm.
literature, art, all those things.
Right.
So at this point, I just never run out of things I want to write about.
Okay. All right. Cool. So, what made you decide to write Ageless Soul?
I wrote Care of the Soul 25 years ago, which was kind of a basic book on bringing soul into life and culture.
Hmm.
It laid down the basic elements of that work.
Hmm.
And ever since then, I've been writing some books that are sort of elaborations of care of the soul or applying care of the soul to specific areas of life.
Hmm.
So I've written about spirituality, I've written about sexuality,
Hmm.
and about work.
Hmm.
And so at this time in my life, I'm 77 now, it makes sense that
Okay.
I would write about aging.
Okay. Yeah, that sure makes sense. So, for the benefit of our listeners who are not aware of what the book is about, what is Ageless Soul all about?
It's my attempt to look at the inner experience of aging, not the outer details. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
write about how to handle your finances or take care of your physical health.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm interested in is what happens inside us as we get older. And by older, I don't necessarily mean really advanced age, because people who are quite young, like let's say transitioning from their 20s to their 30s, have to go through a passage at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this book really speaks to them. And in fact, those younger people have been telling me that it's important to them.
Nice, nice. So, was there ever, I guess, I mean, I was just wondering, was there like an aha moment when you decided to write about it, or was it more like, a growing realization over time?
It was a growing realization. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
in the writing of it, I discovered so many things that were interesting to me that when I started out, I thought, well, how am I going to write this book? Because it doesn't sound that fascinating. Well, I
Okay.
still have my energy for it.
All right.
But it turned out as I wrote that every subject I picked up, well, what I do is I try to reimagine, I try to reframe everything. That's what I do in all my writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to reframe some of the assumptions that we make about aging. And that I found quite exciting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting, interesting. So let me get to the point. One of the points over here about aging, and I guess it's we humans have always had a sense of fear about getting older, and aging, and this takes the form in like searching for a place like the fountain of youth. Um, what, in your opinion, is behind this fear of getting old, this fear of aging?
Well, I think it's quite natural. As I say, I'm 77. I have some fears. I think that I think fear is an important part of life. I don't want to trample over our fears,
Right?
but you don't want to get overwhelmed by them either because they can interfere. So I think the most important thing is to acknowledge your fears. So
Mm,
yes, I mean I can say, yeah, I don't want to lose my memory. I don't want to lose my mobility. I don't want to become too dependent on people. But
mm,
in fact, that's what human beings do. And I've
mm.
seen, like my father and other friends who got older, I've seen what happens. And that's all right because I'm part of this human experiment, and this is what happens at this point.
Okay. So that's an interesting outlook because I mean, I think for a lot of people, they've got this certain ideal age of youth in mind, and they want to stay in that place rather than progressing and getting older or aging.
Yes, I understand that. And so I try to address that. In fact, I mean, not exactly seriously, I suggest that we look for a fountain of age, not just a fountain of youth,
Mm,
because there's something very valuable about getting older.
mhm,
Most people understand that some of the great struggles that you have when you're younger
mhm,
are past you then. Most people don't have to really work so hard at their relationships or their careers and things like that.
mhm,
Now they can relax more and they can get involved in things that really address their soul.
mhm,
And I tell quite a number of stories about people who have had this experience that as they got older and when they retired, they actually found things to do that that matched their own nature more, and therefore those activities were more satisfying to them. And in that sense, then getting older was a better place to be.
mm,
The other thing I wanted to say about it is that I think there's a way, when you look at the experience of aging internally, there's a way in which you can keep your youth in your attitude and in your sense of yourself.
mhm,
I don't think age has to be so literal. So
mhm,
for myself, I often feel that I am 40 something. I'm
mhm.
42. I think that's the age I usually feel. I'm
Okay.
actually physically 77, but I
Mhm,
feel like I'm 42. And that's what I want to be. I want to have that mixture of a youthful sense of myself without denying the fact that I'm physically getting older.
okay. So, that brings up an interesting point because you made a differentiation between physical aging and what's that? Internal, getting older and in the sense of getting better. Um, are there, I mean, physical aging, it's obvious. We can see it in our skin, we can see it visually, but is there anything that goes on within us physically, the common characteristics that come with aging physically?
Well, of course, yeah, we do change
Hmm.
in so many ways. You can't move as fast. Maybe you get aches and pains that you didn't have when you were younger.
Hmm.
You might have some more serious illnesses that come along.
Hmm.
These things happen. They happen when you get older. Not maybe to everybody, but I think to most of us.
Hmm.
So we just have to. I think the key here is not to see ourselves as primarily physical beings.
Hmm.
I think that's the trouble with the modern philosophy, the way we live in our modern world. We interpret everything physically.
Hmm.
So we see everything biologically. Today it's very popular to reduce everything to brain activity.
Right,
I think
right.
that's I think that's materialism. I think that ignores the fact that we live meaningful lives. In my language, that we have a soul. We are not just material physical beings.
Hmm.
And if you can make that shift to realizing that you are infinitely more than your physical self, then aging is not quite so bad.
Mm, okay. So it's really about, so what I'm getting here is sort of like when people are younger, they tend to focus more on physical, and as they grow older, they tend to look elsewhere, or they should look elsewhere, like to other things, as you say, possibly the soul, possibly a spiritual connection there.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So I do think there's a natural spirituality that develops as you get older.
Mm,
For example, you slow down a bit. You can become more contemplative. You can spend more time doing nothing, which is really an important thing to do
mm,
nothing. and to walk and become closer to nature. Those things are really important. And they really could be important the whole of your life. But I think as you get into the older years, then it becomes more natural because you do have to slow down a bit. I mean, in some ways, I say that I feel like I'm a hypocrite because I haven't slowed down much myself.
Right.
But physically, I have to. I still travel too much, and I give talks everywhere, and I still continue my life. But at the same time, there is a slowing down that has to be just part of your physical life, and I think that fosters your spirituality.
Okay, okay, interesting. And so that kind of leads into my next question because aging occurs to me as being a somewhat nebulous term. I mean, you think, when I would think aging, I think, someone really old and, worn down and stuff like that. What is, I get the sense here that there's a collapse between growing older and aging. Are these two really different things?
I think they're very different things. And as I said before, we age when we're very young. We're still aging.
Mm-hmm.
And also, this is not so literal. I give examples of people, extraordinary people, who died quite young.
Mm-hmm.
One of the examples I give is the poet John Keats.
Mm-hmm.
He died when he was 26, and he wrote some of the most profound thoughts about the soul and about human life.
Mm-hmm.
But he died at 26. So some of these things we quote him sometimes, at least I do, and some of my friends quote him a lot. And he wrote these things that we are quoting when he was 21. It's an interesting thing. Some people sort of develop, they age in a sense, they age faster, or they don't need this whole long physical life
Uh-huh.
to reach a point of understanding. And I think that Keats, and there are many, many other examples, and creative people like musicians. I think it was Schubert who died at 31. I mean, wrote all this music.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very sophisticated. It has to come from a very mature person.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think aging as maturing,
Mm-hmm.
coincides with aging physically, because we have all these examples of people who are very young who had matured tremendously.
Mm-hmm. And of course, there's also the opposite of that. I mean, people who are, say, in your about your age, who are kind of still like adolescents or even children.
That's right. So it works both ways.
Right.
So you can be, and I'm sure we all know people who are older, really old, and have never really grown up. I mean, you see that. You see
Yeah.
it all over the place.
Yeah.
So yes, that's the other side of it, that you can grow older in years, but you haven't had the experience that makes you grow up.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what I mean by aging.
Mm-hmm.
The way I put it in the book is that we age by taking life on, by accepting the invitations life gives us regularly.
Mm-hmm.
And that involves change and taking risks. And I think a lot of people choose not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And when they do that, they don't age. So they grow old and they're still really too young.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Interesting. So your book mentions, I think, 4 or 5 phases of aging. Five, I think. Is this correct?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, just for the benefit of us who are those of us who don't know, aren't aware of your book, what are the characteristics of each of these phases?
Well, we start out we start out not even thinking about age. We're in a timeless place in youth,
Right.
and and then what happens is that something comes along, like very often it's very insignificant.
Mm-hmm.
You look in the mirror and you see a gray hair. You
Mm-hmm.
can see that in your 20s. Some people can, or they see a wrinkle, or they realize they can't quite get up from a crouch as quickly as they used to.
Mm-hmm.
These little signs come along, and it's like a sudden, like a prick, like something comes along and wakes you up to the fact that you're getting older, that you can no longer live in that young place.
Right.
And so I think that's an important moment, and I write about that quite a bit in this book. I call it the first taste of aging.
Mm-hmm.
That we may have many first tastes, many tastes of aging throughout our lives, but I think those early ones are like initiations. They help us shift from being very young to just beginning to get older.
Mm.
And then of course, once you have that, then most of us then have a period of life where we are just going along, trying to build our career and trying to
Mm.
find out what we should do with life and
Right.
finding a partner
Mm.
and maybe having children. And that whole part of life, just goes along where we are. It's really kind of the main part of life, I suppose, where we're doing our job and we might think about aging, but not too seriously. And
Right.
we're still in a heroic mode where we're trying to be somebody in the world and to have a good relationship and raise our children, all that kind of thing.
Mm.
It's a wonderful, wonderful time. Gradually, of course, that time then moves to a place where your children leave. So we have what they call the empty nest syndrome.
Right.
And so there comes a point in that mature process that's ongoing where suddenly there's another kind of change where you wake up and you say, well, I can't live that way anymore because I'm discovering that something new is developing now.
Mm.
So there is then the movement toward thinking about retirement. And, at 50, people get a card from AARP or from the government saying
Mm.
that, now you're a senior. And
Mm-hmm.
at
Mm-hmm.
50 today, people don't feel like seniors, but they do have to wake up and say, well, it's really approaching.
Right.
So old age approaches and you have to adjust. You have to adjust fairly early to getting older, to getting old.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's the later stage where you are actually old. And
Right.
that also is difficult. I feel it. I didn't feel it in my 60s much, but I felt it at 70. I
Mm.
felt a real shift. I thought, well, I can't pretend to be young anymore.
Mm.
I'm not going to get away with it. So now I have to adjust to actually being an older person. And what is that like? And how can I make it a happy time for myself?
Mm. Okay, so okay, I got that. So, maybe maybe some of those listening can figure out where exactly they are. And what's also coming out from here is that it's natural, and aging is natural, and it should be accepted as it comes because it's a natural part of life.
Yes, it is. And that's not easy, but I think that this is where a more spiritual, more exalted or bigger vision of life has to be. This is not a thing that modern people do much. Modern
Yeah.
Americans, especially, don't think that way. They're not very philosophically minded. It's like we're very practical. We just want to accomplish things, take care of our problems, and retire and go unconscious.
Yeah.
It's too bad because I think, in order to deal with aging, we need to reflect. We need to think about things. We need to read some poetry,
Hmm.
which is, an alarming thing to say here. I spent a lot of my time in Ireland and in England,
Hmm.
and over in those countries, it's very common for people to read poetry
Mm.
and to discuss it among themselves.
Mm.
In Ireland, I was in Ireland not long ago, and the newspaper came out and they printed a poem by the president of the country,
Hmm.
and I thought, when would that ever happen in America?
Good point.
So we have a particular problem that we are not reflective enough, and therefore aging is a shock,
Hmm.
and we don't know how to deal with it because it does require reflection and thought.
Hmm. Right, right. And it also occurs to me that probably emotions come into play here. Like, I don't know. I think I'm not sure if this came from you, but it's something about anger held that keeps people stopped.
Yes, I do write about it. I have a whole chapter on anger in this book because it kept coming up in my conversations with people about age.
Mm.
They find that a lot of people find that older people can be quick to get angry, or they're sort of chronically angry and cantankerous and not easy to deal with. That's not true of everybody, of course, but
Mm.
we do find that sometimes. I have two reactions, two suggestions about that. One is that, and I get this from other people, but that older people have been around. They've seen how the world can be. They've lived they feel that they lived in a golden age, that the past was a wonderful place. They tend to gild the past, you know,
Right.
and really think it was a lot better than it was. I do that too. I mean, I understand this, but then they're angry at with the way the world is going because it's so different, and
Mhm.
they just had got accustomed to being able to learn to be in the world and be effective in it. Now it's changing radically.
Right.
So people get, you know, they're touchy and about that, and it comes out as anger.
Mhm.
But there's another approach altogether, and that is that, and I know this as a therapist, that many people have had experiences when they were quite young, sometimes even in childhood,
Mhm.
that they've never really sorted through. They've never talked about enough. They haven't sorted it through.
Mhm.
And they're angry from childhood or from early adulthood.
Mhm.
And they need to talk it. They need to be able to release some of that anger from the past because they hold it year after year and decade after
Mhm.
decade. And that makes old age very difficult because that means you're angry. And
Right.
if you're an angry person, nobody wants to be around you. So you
Yeah.
feel lonely and disconnected.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Interesting. And so it's the anger then doesn't come because you're aging. The anger is, it just comes out as it occurs to me, it comes out more of like a symptom of deep, decades long held anger.
I think that's true. I mean,
Mhm.
I have no doubt about that because I work with so many people who have this experience. You talk to them, they say they're angry about something right now, and they don't know why they're so angry.
Mm.
That's a hint, if they don't know what it's about, a hint that it probably is from another time in life.
Mm.
And so I explore that with them, and we find immediately people jump to some point in their past
Mm.
where they were angry, and they've never really had a chance to say how angry they were.
Mm.
So all I have to do as a therapist is give them the opportunity to really talk through that experience. It doesn't solve anything, but talking it through at a deep and open level does relieve a lot of the weight and tension that has been gathered together around that particular event.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Interesting. So let's flip over to another side of this. I mean, the more spiritual side. In your opinion, so you have, I'm sure, given your age, you do have kind of a solid idea of this. What would a spiritual senior look like? How might he think? How might he act? How might he view the world? And what is it that drives it?
Well, that's really a very rich and interesting question. One I'm very fascinated by because I've been writing about spirituality all my life.
Hmm.
So I think that what's going on is partly that it's very different from one person to another. You can't make
Mm.
a blanket statement. But for example, I know from the case of my parents, they grew up as a Catholic couple, and I grew up in a Catholic and family environment, very intense and devout. And they went to church regularly. They wouldn't miss a Sunday, you know, they wouldn't miss for anything, and often go during the week
Mm-hmm.
and get involved and pray at home. And my father was much more worldly in a way, and much more. His mind was very much at work, and he didn't accept so much of what was thrown at him from the churches. My mother did; she was kind of more receiving and accepting. But I saw that for them, their belief and their going to church was very, very important for their spiritual life. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, I admire them for doing it, and I wish that, in a way that it could be that easy for me. And not that it's easy, but that's quite clear.
Right.
But for some of us, if we've explored the spiritual life at all, we've probably moved past the place where we can just go to church and feel that that takes care of it.
Mm-hmm.
We want something more than that.
Right.
I think that's the place where the natural world comes in, where it's
Mm-hmm.
so important to be connected to nature.
Mm-hmm.
Nature becomes you might say, like the doorway. It's the passage that allows you to have a spiritual outlook on life. Nature is very important for that. I also find that the arts are very important. Now, I mean the secular arts, not religious arts, like
Mm-hmm.
painting and poetry and novels and
Mm-hmm.
music and things like that. these secular arts, I don't believe really they're really secular. They are inherently spiritual.
Hmm.
So to read a good poet would be to expand your spiritual life. And just imagine if you discover a poet that really speaks to you and you can read with pleasure what that poet has to say. Wow, you've got, if you're retired, you've got time now maybe to explore that. Or
Right.
you may want to go to an art gallery and really find out what's going in the world of art, what's going on.
Mhm.
And that too can be a piece of your of the various elements that constitute your spiritual life.
Mm. Okay, and of course, possibly like being a mentor to younger folk. I mean, like it occurs to me that you are to other people. I presume that's part of it. That would be a
Yes,
good part of it.
well, yes. As people get older, yes, I think that's one of the joys of getting older, that you've got something to give back,
Hmm.
something to say.
Hmm.
You've had experience. Hopefully, you've reflected on your experience.
Hmm.
And so you have something to say. And I have stories in the book of people who have been very important mentors to me. I can't imagine my life without them. And they were so valuable and precious to me.
Hmm.
And they gave me their time and they gave me their attention.
Hmm.
It's so easy when you're getting older to be self-absorbed. And I think all the difference in the world would come if you were to think outside yourself, to give yourself generously.
Hmm.
You would get so much back because to mentor someone
Hmm.
is yeah, it helps the young person or the other person, but it gives so much to you because now your life is meaningful
Hmm.
and you discover that you really do have something to say.
Hmm.
So I think it's a wonderful way to make old age more meaningful and happier.
All right, right, definitely, and definitely like to connect to the new generation, the younger generations as well. I mean, rather than seeing it as us and them, or you young folk and you old folks, it's sort of like a continuity there.
That's a very important point you just made. That you've got to keep youth and age together if you want to age well. You have
Hmm.
to keep youth and age together in your own self,
Hmm.
in the own sense of yourself, so that you are both older and also young. You keep your youth. You can do that.
Hmm.
You can still be that young person even when you're older.
Hmm.
And then the other thing, of course, is to be around young people
Hmm.
because that really helps support that youth within yourself and it keeps you flexible.
Right. Okay. Cool. So, Thomas, let's say you come across someone who's getting older, who knows he or she is getting older, and it's kind of that this person's kind of lost, not quite sure how to take aging, and you only had enough time to tell this person one thing. What would be that one thing you would tell that person?
That's a challenge.
Okay.
Let's see. Um, I would probably, to me, because I'm used to talking to people in meaningful ways. As a therapist, to me, what's most important would be not what I would say to them, but how I would come across to them.
Hmm.
I might just let them know one way or another that, look, I've gone through it. I know what it's like to get older.
Hmm.
And I know what it's like to have some fears and doubts and you have problems you have to deal with that are particular to aging.
Hmm.
But I can tell you that there's so much to make you happy. And I really think that when people talk to me, I think they probably do see, most of them tell me that I seem younger than I am.
Hmm.
And I think what they're seeing is that I keep that youthfulness in myself.
Hmm.
And I try to foster it and I try to reveal it and show it to people.
Hmm.
At the same time, I show my aging.
Hmm.
So I have to admit that I can't do some things I wish I could do.
Right.
Like we live right next to a mountain that's about 4,000 feet high. It's not a big mountain, but it's a mountain that's hiked by a lot of people
Right.
frequently. I can't do that mountain anymore.
Hmm.
I can't I can't do it. So I have to let people know that I can't do that.
Hmm.
And so that's a way of saying, look, I'm older now. There are things I can't do.
Hmm.
But let's do some other things. Like I think of things I can do that I would enjoy very much that keep my youth alive. So I think this is the secret. And the answer to your question is that in my being, in my example, I would like to show people that it's possible to grow older without surrendering to age, that you can still keep your youth.
Okay, well, uh, great words of wisdom like there, and you know, thanks very much for sharing. I mean, I'm sure you're, I reckon you really are walking the talk for all this is concerned.
I hope so. I didn't write this book just to find another topic to write about. I wrote it because I wanted to work through my own experience of aging. And I thought it might be useful to other people if they were able to sort of look over my shoulder as I try to sort these things out.
Right. Okay. Cool. All right then, Thomas. Thank you very much. So the book is Ageless Soul: The Lifelong Journey Towards Meaning and Joy. The author's our guest, Thomas Moore, and you can find his book on Amazon. So, Thomas, thanks a lot for being an author story. It was a real pleasure to listen to you share your experience and your point of view.
Thank you, Alex. I enjoyed so many of your questions that really made me think. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, everyone, I invite you all, be an elder or an elder at heart, to go out and check out Ageless Soul, or even if you're not an elder, I'm sure you'll pick up something from it. Also, you can also subscribe to our channel if you want, and I'll see you next week, everyone, on our next Author Story weekly interviews with another amazing author.